Welcome to A Moment of Bach, where we take our favorite moments from the composer's vast musical output, just a minute's worth or even a few seconds, and show you why we think they are remarkable. We are your hosts, Alex and Christian Giebert. Today's moment is from a cantata, BWV 54, Widerstehe, doch der Sünde.
Stand firm against all sinning, or its poison will possess you. Alex, in German, this noun, poison, is Gift. Any German student will know, who's English speaking, this funny false friend. Gift does not mean gift. It means poison.
That's right. And in our visit to Germany, I remember that we had little presents that we would give our homestay families, and we were told very clearly not to call these gifts.
I don't remember that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, in the tour meeting, that's what we were told. So don't call these gifts.
So a pretty young J.S. Bach is kind of trying to scare us here with the musical description of this text. This is a cantata that Bach wrote in his time in Weimar. If you look at some of the research done on this cantata, you'll see that for a while scholars thought it was a fragment. It's only got 3 movements. It doesn't have any choruses. It's written entirely for one solo singer. It's a little bit unclear what type of singer this is. It's scored for an alto voice, but it's a little low for a female alto. It's got some low Fs in it. It looks really hard and low and hard to project just by first glance for the female alto voice type, which leads us to assume that maybe it was written for like a countertenor, male falsetto, something like that. And what we have here in our Netherlands Bach Society recording is the male countertenor, Maarten Engeltjes. In a companion video to this masterful performance of this cantata, you'll hear him talk about how difficult the range is of his voice singing this. It's in a little bit of an awkward place in the voice, and it goes over what we would call register breaks in the voice, and forces him to sing across an area of the vocal range which is hard to move up and down through. But we do know now that the cantata is complete in 3 parts. We found more evidence to support that. We even know what Sunday it's for. And it was actually for a soloist. So this was not a cantata for a choir. This was a cantata that was led and narrated by this single soloist. Maybe male, we don't know. And its theme is a little scary. Stand firm against all sinning, or its poison, that is sinning's poison, will possess you. Don't be blinded by Satan. Bach, in trying to set this text, he was being a little experimental in his younger days. He decided that, what was in order was a shocking beginning. I remember reading some sort of internet forum about what's in classical music history, broadly speaking, classical with a lowercase c, all those hundreds of years, not just talking about classical with a capital C, like Mozart and Haydn, but classical with a lowercase c. What's an example of a musical composition that begins with the most strange or striking first note or first chord? Some great conversations, great suggestions were made. I learned about something from that conversation. I learned about les éléments, the elements, and the beginning, the first movement of it is called Chaos, Le Chaos, and it's by the composer Jean-Ferry Rebel. Looks like rebel in the English language. And anyway, this first note is just insane. Of that piece, figured bass shows, Alex, you got to check this out. The figured bass shows like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's just like it's just a cluster. It was a special effect and quite honestly like a little bit over the top, but it's amazing. But the rest of the suite is just like nice French Baroque music. But anyway, someone's comment was this cantata, this Bach cantata, Widerstehe, doch der Sünde. Guard yourself, or resist sin. I've had it in the back of my head for a while, and I know that there was a great recording, but then we received an email from a listener, Mons, from Denmark, a Swedish person living in Denmark actually, who suggested this very moment. The first bars with the intricate opening chord, and I thought, what a perfect excuse for us to talk about this. Because Alex, quite honestly, there are the moments of Bach that we talk about in this show. Sometimes they're just personal favorites of obscure things. Sometimes they are personal types of moments that we love. You mentioned recently you like the ones where the bass falls out and then re-enters at a dramatic moment, the drop, so to speak. But this one is more along the lines of one of the most obvious moments. Like if you told a Bach scholar the conceit of our podcast, they would say, well, one moment is this one. Like this is a moment. It's one of the best ones. And it's the very, very first chord we hear at the beginning of this solo cantata, this first movement, this first longer movement. It is scored for 2 violins and 2 violas. Alex, you pointed out that that's interesting. Of course, like those of you who know orchestra music out there, usually there aren't 2 viola parts, there's 1 part for the viola section. Here we have a violin 1 and 2, viola 1, viola 2 part. So there's 4 independent upper string parts, and then a soloist, the alto soloist, and then the continuo, which is played by the bass instruments and the harpsichord and or organ. The first chord we hear is dissonant and strange. Alex, if you are predictable in choosing moments that have bass drops, I think this is although this isn't my moment really, this is actually Mons's, but my episodes are predictable in this way because I pick the ones that start on the weird harmonies, I guess. If you check out this first bass note, we expect this pleasing, stable harmony at the beginning. Instead, we get this. What has been prescribed here is for 5 notes to happen at the same time, which is weird. Most chords have 3 pitches in them, total different kinds of pitches. This one has 5. It is clearly a chord over a note. That bass note that stays put on the bottom we've said is called a pedal point. To start a musical composition on such a strange chord, there has to be a reason. And for Bach, the reason here is the text, "Stand firm against all sinning." It's not the standing firm. Maybe the bottom note is the standing firm. The sinning and the poison to resist is everything that happens above. But if you listen to the other companion video, where the director, Lars Ulrik Mortensen, is interviewed, it's another great video, he'll tell you that that might be the poison, but all of that amazing string writing that happens in those 4 parts above as the music progresses and steps up and up and up, higher and higher and higher. It's so beautiful and tantalizing, and maybe that's the actual temptation because it's so beautiful. Yeah, because you know, of course, the music is not ugly. That's the thing, is that in Bach's Baroque style of his day, he could not actually write 100% dissonant music. Everything had to come to some beautiful harmony at some point. So it's a weird line he walks, but Mortensen argues that it's a duality. It's both. It's this strange poison of sin that we must avoid, which is this weird chord at the beginning, and the farther we go, the stranger it gets until the voice enters. But it's also the alluring beauty of these chords just pulsating and moving strangely and almost distractingly.
Yeah.
You know, we can't know for sure if that's what Bach really thought, but the weird sequential nature of it going up and up, the harmonic sequences going up, and then some very striking harmonies throughout. It makes a lot of sense.
It's tense. It's like a rising fear, almost a panic, you know, like panic attack. There's this heartbeat like bum, 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 bum. And it's like, even though the heartbeat stays consistent and doesn't get faster, because a cello rondo doesn't really fit the idiom of this style of music. Like you said, Christian, he's walking this line. The music's still going to sound a certain way because it's Baroque music. I don't think it would make sense to have a cello rondo here at the beginning of a movement like this, but it still portrays that like sense of rising panic because of the notes rising and layering like they do.
The first line is stand firm against or resist. So maybe, Alex, it's like that's why that bass note stays. And there is a bit of panic building in the upper parts. Maybe that's someone's anxiety, or maybe that is the Temptations. You know, you could kind of read this a few different ways, but it certainly works either way.
Yeah, and we've talked before a little bit, especially when we were talking about the St. Matthew Passion, about how I believe that Bach's instrumental stuff, especially the stuff in the instrumental introduction for a lot of these solo arias, is the musical depiction of the emotion that the singer is singing about that they can't quite put fully into words or even fully into their own melody. It's really all there in the instrument. We talked about this in the Erbarme dich, right? Like the famous aria from the St. Matthew Passion. There's the singer who is Peter in the story of the Passion, contrite after having betrayed Jesus 3 times. And the singer is expressing the emotion, sure, but the violin solo with its complexity is almost able to do that more than what the singer can even do. So I think that's what's happening here with the instrumental introduction. Like, that battle is happening internally. That's something that's hard to express, at least in this idiom. Again, later composers, especially Romantic era, could do a lot more bombast with the voice. But then again, they could do that with the orchestra also. But anyway, my point is that the violins and violas here, along with the throbbing bass continuo thing, is just, it is the emotion of the singer, of the text.
That's very profound that the instruments can, because they don't have words, they can express a sort of more, or a more abstract expression according to this musical style. Of course, it doesn't work if you don't follow this musical style or understand it. And composers in later eras, especially more modern or contemporary eras, would start admitting that everything is completely based on context and that nothing expresses anything objectively. But that's a bit of a postmodern subjective position. Of course, everything, it only works if you know this, if you know the stuff. But we do, because everyone has heard, at least in the background of their life, they've been exposed to some sort of Western classical music. Right,
and it permeates everything, even in the Western society, that is. Even like film score and everything like that, I mean.
Yeah, for better or for worse, even, you could even argue.
Yeah.
But with Bach, it's just so clear that, like you said, Alex, the instruments take the burden of expression. It's almost like when the vocalist or chorus does finally come in after 8 or 10 or 12 bars, it's almost like a punch to the gut, because they're actually saying the thing in actual words that you suspected must be the case as it goes, or they clarify it with words, but it's just so different than just singing about a thing with emotion.
Oh man, that's so true. Because I'm thinking of the Ausliebe from the St. Matthew Passion. Like, I imagine that aria as though it just started with the soprano soloist singing, coming in with that beautiful melody, and it would be still amazing because it's so beautiful. But the fact that we had that instrumental introduction with the flute and the sort of plaintive, but yet kind of strident little staccato oboes. That is painting that entire picture. And then when the soprano comes in and sings the words, which is "For love, my Savior has died," then it's like, you go, like you just said, Christian, you go like, oh, they're saying it. They're saying what I'm feeling.
Right. It's not like a symphony where the expression is, the interpretation of it is kind of up to you as it goes. It's like after a certain point, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, we kind of have talked a little bit about how Bach is more of an objective composer than a subjective one in a way. This all goes back to my statement I made a few episodes back about all Bach arias are duets, right? Because the vocalist has their part, but the instrumentalist conveys the emotion. They also get the first and last say. And here we have a section of 2 violas and 2 violins. So it's not really a duet, really.
Well, they count as one.
Yeah, they're the section. That's the obbligato part. That's what's portraying the inner turmoil.
So even though we have already explored the technical pitches involved in that first moment, I can't help it but to mention my other 2 favorite micro moments. One of them occurs on the 3rd beat of the 8th measure. And it's just this really nice harmony that's a little unexpected. It sounds like it's trying to resolve, but on a strong beat, it is dissonant, a little bit like the first note of the piece. Again, the continuo part suggests, the bass part suggests that Bach possibly thought of it as I'll say the more interesting version of the 2 options that he had. Because if it was resolved, it would simply sound like this F minor triad here. But it doesn't really go to that, except for the tiniest moment. I think we're just going to have to assume that it is the more interesting chord there. This A flat major 7th chord. 7th chords are common in this style of music, but they're almost always a different type. We call dominant 7th chords. This is much more unusual as a vertical harmony to just exist. So it's really hard to say if Bach thought of it that way, but it's really much more modern if he did, I guess.
Yeah, and I can't help but noticing that it does it again 2 bars later. And this is a cool thing that Bach does a lot. I don't think we've ever really talked about this, where he comes to a cadence, and it's not a deceptive cadence because it does land on the tonic, but he still has like a couple bars to go and wraps up a second little cadence. So that first one wasn't the real one, you know, like he gives us another one. He does this a lot. And in this one, as you said, it's on the 8th measure. It falls into a cadence on measure 9, which gives us a nice 8-bar thing before the cadence. It's like just feels right. And yet he can't help but, I got a little extra thing for you. And what he does there on measure 9 is he has the violins hold the pedal point, which is what he had the bass doing before. Now he has the violins do it, although it's just a long note for them. With the violas are getting the little extra fluffy sort of 16th note faster stuff, the da-da-da-da-da thing. Mm-hmm. But then in measure 10, a thing happens on beat 3, just like you said it on measure 8 again. It's really similar. The notes are a little lower now, but it's the same chord as actually on the and of 3, so it's a little, it just flies by faster, but it is still that A flat major 7 chord is still happening.
Yep, he extends cadences a lot like this. It's very pleasing and proportionally more interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to see that next week too, because my moment that I picked for next week is a similar extra cadence. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always great. I just always love that when something is not 4 or 8 or 16. If it can just be 10, or 5 or 7, it's just so much more unusual. It doesn't always work, but because it doesn't always feel as squared off, but it's just a much more interesting number. And if you listen to music that's popular, any pop music or anything, it's always 4 and 8 groups of measures and beats and stuff. It's always 8 and 16, and it is the default. And when things are not like that in Baroque music, especially, it's really nice. So Alex, even though these first 2 moments we've spoken about today have been within the instrumental introduction, I'm arguing that the most striking moment in this movement of this cantata occurs later in the B section. And I'm using the word B section because this is a aria that begins with its main section and it's longer. We're calling that A, the A section, let's call it. So right now I'm talking about the B section before the A section is repeated again, because this aria is A, B, A, goes back to the beginning. So when we get to this next chunk of text, be not blinded by Satan, for those who violate God's majesty shall be felled by a deadly curse.
Lass dich nicht den Satan blenden, denn die Gottesseele beschwenden, trifft ein Fluch, der tödlich ist.
And when that text finishes on deadly curse, in German, the German grammar is different, of course, so the last word is deadly is, basically, last couple of words, but the music winds down to a cadence and has a extremely uncommon type of deception.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about deceptive cadences before. Deceptive cadences are allowed. They are part of harmony. You think you're going home, and then you divert going home by instead going to a related place, but not quite right, and a completely different mood, and it can lead you elsewhere. But this isn't even that. This deception, it's sort of like a deception on top of a deception, because not even a deceptive cadence. The voice part appears to be correct, but the chord we wind up on is retrogressive. It's going backwards. Harmony is supposed to move forward in this kind of music, everything from, 1600 to 1880. Mm-hmm. Harmony moves forward, and it lingers and pushes and pulls, and that's the power of it, but it finally gets home. And here, we're finally almost there, but we don't even get really deceived. We just get completely diverted. We go backwards 1 in the series of fifths that's supposed to make up the progression of chords that we go in. You see what I'm saying, Alex? It's like, it's actually incorrect. You can't go from the 5 chord back up to the 2 chord. It's the wrong direction to move. It's like going the wrong way on a one-way street. It's illegal.
Yeah, except, like you said, the voice part does like the right thing and lands on the C in this case. But that C, Bach, because he throws the wrong chord, the curse chord there, the illegal chord there, the C just functions as the 7th in that chord, which is really, really kind of an awkward sound. But I do have to point out that, again, according to the rules in the idiom, he does actually resolve that after like 4 more bars of the instrumental material, right? He does the cadence.
Yeah, it does get
this
there. Time
it works. And then that's a failed one and then a completed one. And then the rest of the B section is just another set of that, another failed one. And then another completed one, this time in a different key, this time in the dominant key of the minor. So like, this is such a good thing, and you need to be at a keyboard to really understand this if you're a musician anyway. But we can't go into a lot of music theory detail as much as we want to on this podcast sometimes. But here he gives us a failed one again, another like cursed note here, and this one again the voice part lands in the right spot. This time it's a G, but now the chord, instead of being a G major chord or minor, whatever, it's actually a G7, and the bass is even on the 7th, so it sounds very dissonant. And he doesn't give us that real cadence of that until the end of the B section, so like 3 more bars.
Yes, this one is also wrong, so to speak, although it's in a completely different way. the first one was just actually a wrong direction in harmonic progression.
Yeah.
This one, it is okay harmonically, but it's just also maybe just as striking in terms of that bass note being unexpected. And they're both wild and they're just so different. It's a great thing about Bach is that they're two things that have to be, they're both like a theme word, like curse, for instance, except they're different, you know?
Yes, but you're right, Christian. That first one is more illegal, more incorrect, more striking to my ear too. But I always tell my groups this when we're singing something that's particularly dissonant or playing it or whatever. And you have to really mean it and not shy away from the dissonance because two reasons. One, because if you hit the dissonance kind of hard and then relax on the consonants, it's just musically satisfying. But the main reason is just because you don't want it to sound wrong, like a mistake, you know? Like in this Netherlands Bach Society version, of course they always do such a good job, and you can hear the absolute just like confidence that they hit this like curse note, you know, that we're calling it, the illegal note. And it's absolutely clear that it's on purpose. And it's still jarring, but it doesn't give you that uncomfortable feeling as a listener of like, oh, is that wrong?
Right, exactly. And this director, Maestro Mortensen, is so good with this. You can tell he knows exactly those moments to pull out of the group strongly. He takes so much joy in it. You can tell that this first movement is full of moments like that, where he can really just like almost revel in the strangeness of harmony that happens during this music. And I'd like to explore this topic in a future episode more, but there's also something going on here that I'm very interested in as a composer, which is, it's something that the soloist Martin Engeltjes says in the companion video. There's a theory that with a piece like this, that Bach actually wrote it in this weird vocal range between two registers of his voice on purpose. In other words, the music is hard to perform on purpose. And it might seem kind of weird, because as a composer, our effort should be toward writing something practical and idiomatic for the instruments that we write for and the voices. But there is something to be said about writing something purposefully difficult, not impossible, but hard, so that the effort of performance comes through in the performance.
Yeah, and that's almost more of an avant-garde kind of modern outlook on music. You know, there's some composers who do that, who make their music intentionally very intensely hard because they want it to, like, the brain power to be used really. They want the high CPU usage of the brain on that. They want it to be like, to look hard, you know? Mm-hmm. There's a great piece by Tom Johnson called Failing.
For bass.
The subtitle is a very difficult piece for solo string bass. It's great. Yeah. And it has like narration whether the string bass player is supposed to read while they're playing, and the piece just keeps getting harder, and it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it does seem like a modern idea to put that into words. And we can't prove that Bach actually did that for this particular cantata on purpose, but it sure seems like it.
Yeah.
The effort of standing firm against sinning, or its poison will possess you. I mean, you don't want the musicians to have the easiest time with that. You want it to sound almost pained.
And now, here is the instrumental introduction to the cantata Widerstehe, doch der Sünde. If this introduction to a musical moment has inspired you to hear the rest of this cantata, please see the link in the episode description to see the performance of Widerstehe, doch, Sünde by the Netherlands Bach Society. Do you want to hear our new episodes as we release them? Find us on your podcast app and hit subscribe.
Thanks especially to listener Mons, who suggested this moment from this cantata. And Alex, what will we be looking at next week?
Next week, we'll take a look at the first movement of the cantata BWV 99, Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan.
Until next time, enjoy those moments.